Greetings from North Carolina. My name is Mike Irwin. I am the co-founder and the chairman of the board for the Positivity Project. I've also co-authored a book titled Lead Yourself First, and would like to spend some time talking to you today about this concept, right? Especially in the coronavirus times. And earlier this week, we held a Zoom cast with about 50 or 60 principals, counselors, some teachers from P2 schools. The recording function didn't work then, so we got it up and running right now. So I'm going to walk you through some thoughts, and I've been fortunate enough to be sharing these thoughts in this presentation with the Boston Celtics and companies, Fortune 500 companies and nonprofit organizations over the past couple of weeks. And these concepts and these ideas have really resonated. And when you think about the stress and the complexity that you are under in the field of education right now, I would put it up there, right below healthcare providers and people on the front lines right now. Like, the stress levels are incredibly high in terms of the education field, with all of the stress and the uncertainty. And so hopefully these thoughts that I share with you are useful and helpful to you. And while we won't have a chance to interact and dialogue this time for the future Zoomcast, I hope you can join us, because you will be able to ask questions or see what questions other people are asking. So with that, I'm going to go here and I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to walk through the slide presentation and a bunch of ideas that I hope are meaningful and I hope can help you to really think about how you're going to continue to lead yourself, and then lead your families, lead your schools, lead your students through this, which will be going on for at least, looks like, the next 4, if not 8 weeks, depending on how long the school year goes. So, and then even when that is over and we go into the next school year, there's going to be things that need to be unpacked and relearned and all that. So first of all, there is a term in 1987 in the U.S. Army War College where they define it called VUCA, or a VUCA environment, which stands for it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And while all those words kind of seem like cousins of each other, when you stack them together, what you get is this phrase, or this mnemonic device. And I would encourage you to think about actually using and introducing this phrase, with your staff, with your colleagues and your peers, and maybe even with parents of your students, because I think it's really important to know this is not business as usual. You certainly know that, not just in your professional lives, but in people's personal lives. And so there is a phrase that helps us to better kind of pin the tail on the donkey to understand what we're going through, and it's this, VUCA. Now, having gone to West Point, and my co-founder Jeff Bryan, I graduated from West Point in 2002. He graduated in 2004. Part of what you study there is military history and philosophy. And when you look back at Sun Tzu and what he wrote in The Art of War, it's pretty powerful. And I don't want to focus on the last part. I want to focus on that first sentence. If you know your enemy and yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Doesn't mean you're going to win every one of them, right? But it does mean that you're positioned to win every one of them, and that over the long run, you're going to be okay. You're going to be successful. And the key here really is, like, do you know your enemy? And when we think about right now, I think it's important to kind of just pinpoint this, but the enemy that we are all facing, all of us right now collectively, is the impact of COVID-19. And the impact it's had on our personal lives, on our professional lives, on our overall well-being, on our ability to do our jobs, right, as effectively as we did before the virus hit. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the aggregate impact. Now, I want to start off by saying that if maybe 3, even 4 of these things were true, like, that would be a pretty big deal, but I think not nearly as stressful as what we're seeing right now. These are 10 things, and there's more, but these are the 10 that I have identified as being the most challenging, right? And that when you aggregate these all together, it's led to that enemy. So, like, let's understand the enemy a little bit better. Right? Number one, no one's unaffected, right? There is high variance. Some people who maybe were already working from home, this hasn't been as big as a transition, but for anybody who's used to going to work, like teachers, right, and going and teaching in a school building, and now being asked to do it from home, I mean, that variance there is huge, right? But everyone's been affected. Number two, routines massively disrupted. Even if you're, again, somebody who, worked remotely or worked part-time, like a lot of people are without jobs or have been furloughed. And even when they do start to come back, it'll be maybe at less time. So routines in terms of when you wake up in the morning and when breakfast is fed and how you do things, there's just massive disruption. Number three, and this is something that Jeff and I have both been dealing with really for the past 4 years, since creating the Positivity Project. And that is like, how do you turn off, like, what's the line between your personal and your professional lives? How do you essentially not always be on? Always be accessible. And I'll talk about that specifically in light of the book that I co-authored, Lead Yourself First. Number 4, there's a actual physiological on top of the psychological impact of the social isolation. You might have seen it before, but I don't call it social distancing. I think that's actually got some problems. It's physical distancing, right? So it's keeping physical distance, but ultimately, we're talking about not social isolation, but we don't see each other. We don't give hugs. We don't, handshake. We don't look each other in the eyes. Zoom and what you're seeing right now is great, but it's not the same. It's just not. Number 5, too much time spent with the same people. And this can, be a bit of a laugher. I've seen a whole bunch of memes out there on this, but at the end of the day, we are spending a lot of time with the same people over and over. And no matter how much you love somebody, no matter how much you revere and respect people, you spend enough time around them. And as we all know, like, we start to get on each other's nerves. Number 6, massive amounts of unstructured time. So even as you think about like all the things that have been taken out of your daily lives right now, and for your teachers, there's a lot of unstructured time. There's a lot of time in the day where they have to figure out how to respond, to emails, and how to, to grade or how to give feedback. And so it's unstructured, meaning like they've got to come up with it's no longer like, hey, show up at school at 7:30 in the morning and leave and head home at 3:30 or 4, right? Of course, to do more work, but it's all unstructured the whole day. And even if there are certain periods of time when you're teaching, leading Zooms, et cetera, right? There's just more unstructured time. Anxiety and fear of the unknown, not just with the virus, but economically. And this is impacting you. It's impacting your students. It might be impacting your family. It's certainly impacting a percentage of your students' families. There's just a lot of fear, not just, again, around the virus, but around the economics and around the overall well-being. Real missing out. People have missed weddings. They've missed trips. My parents were going to go to Ireland. They saved, all this money, their money over all these years, and they were going to go to Ireland this summer, and just like that, gone. Right? And so people are missing out on real things, trips to Disney World, vacations, things that they have been looking forward to for months, if not years, and those things are gone. Comparison, we spend more time, the data shows, more time on Netflix right now, more time on social media, and it's been a problem for about, 7-8 years now, the hyper comparison that we do on social media. And it's just been put on overdrive. So people are looking at and trying to figure out and compare how they're handling the coronavirus compared to other people. And then lastly, it just sums up as this: a majority of people are overwhelmed. Full stop. So how have we responded? Well, one of the things that we do is we know from positive psychology is the character strength of humor is a way. Sometimes, but not always necessarily, with the best of intentions. So for example, your grandparents are called to war, you're being called to sit on your couch. You can do this. Like, not really, right? Like, especially not people in education, you're not clearly being called to sit on your couch. You're called to figure out how to educate students in a new way, and also be contending with, I'm sure, hundreds of emails per day or phone calls per day that come in, right, from parents who are concerned or frustrated or have questions, right? So again, you see that and you're like, oh, it's kind of funny, but it's not, right? You get to homeschool, like this is just hard. And then, of course, the old hair salon and all the things that we're not been able to do. So people can't get haircuts and all that. So in some ways, it's great that people are responding with humor. In other ways, sometimes that humor actually is misplaced or misguided. So again, as you're going through social media, as you're going through the day, just analyzing like, well, how are we processing all this? So what's going on here? Let's talk a little bit about the psychology of this. This is essentially, a transition. Transitions are defined as a process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. So when you think about what's been happening here over the past 4 or 5 weeks, like, there's a transition process. I want to hone in on that word process. It's not like you just flip a switch and go, oh, well, we were doing learning in person and now we're doing distance learning or remote learning. And like, no, it's a process. It's taking you weeks to be able to get to where you're at. And we know that the thing about a process is it's ever evolving, it's ever changing, which makes it so complicated. That being said, I want to spend a little time hopefully building some confidence and giving you the affirmation and the knowledge to know that while not at this magnitude, these are things that we as individuals and as organizations have negotiated before. We have done these things before, good and bad. good transitions like graduating or getting a degree or getting our first job or getting married or having kids or all these things. And then there's the other side of it too, which is losing pets, losing family members, people who've been battling cancer that we know and we see them suffering, being fired from a job or losing a job, right? So like the transitions in life, it's kind of like a sine wave in many ways, right? Where they are real and we have been through them before. I think it's really important to draw some confidence on that, to know that while right now it doesn't feel like it, like we know that we can emerge stronger from this because we have been through transitions before. What's going on during a transition? Typically, not always, but typically for most people, it's an emotional roller coaster, right? When you think about how do you cope, when you think about, like one moment you're on top of the world, yes, I'm doing this and I'm on top of it. And then literally 5 minutes later, it's like, I'm terrible. This is kicking me in the tail. I am being defeated right now, right? And you feel things like everything from like depression or sadness or I'm not worthy to fear and anger. But then there's also the upside, right? That sometimes you have this amazing moment where you feel great and you can see like, wow, like I have been able to pull through this in a way that I didn't know, right? Like, where did you get your strength from? I don't know, but like it's there, right? So it's this emotional roller coaster. And again, last thing here, from another academic article because again, there's a lot of academics over the years, researchers who've looked at these kinds of challenges and these questions and help us to be better positioned to understand them right now, right? There's the shock, right? And then there's the response. For good stuff, it's like there's the honeymoon period where everything's great and everything's good. And then it starts, very often we get into a routine and things can slide, right? When things start out that are bad, the question becomes is like, we get back up, right? We've been knocked to the mat. We get back up, then what, right? Do we respond? Do we change? Do we do things a little bit differently? And then do we find ourselves again on that downward trajectory or up? And the thing I wanted to just highlight right now is to say that being on this roller coaster and the ups and the downs, this is completely normal, completely part of life. If you're not on this roller coaster, I'm concerned for you, right? The key here becomes to recognize and to know when you're on the downside of the roller coaster, right? When things are going poorly, and to be able to sort of interject or to be able to, do an intervention or step back, right, for yourself to say like, wow, like I am super stressed right now. I can feel it like literally like in my like blood. I can feel it in my body, in my mind that I am anxious right now with everything going on with the volume of emails that I just got or the amount of confusion that responded there. And I needed to step back, collect my thoughts, right, and then move forward. And I'll say some more on that in a minute. This is an important point, and we heard from the initial podcast from a lot of folks, a lot of educators reaching out saying this one resonated, and a bunch of people actually said that they're going to send this out, to their parents, right, of their students. But it never feels like it while we're in it, but adversity reveals, purifies, and strengthens in the long run. It's so hard to take that long view, but this is true, right? It reveals the areas where we're strong. It reveals the areas where we are not strong. It reveals and it gives us and it helps us to be able to figure out, okay, what do we need to do better, okay, in our lives as individuals, as organizations, and in the long run, we grow stronger from adversity, so long as it doesn't break us. And so the key here becomes is like making sure, right, that you bend but don't break. Make sure that with all the adversity, the ups and the downs of the life, understand that's normal, but ensure that you allow the bending only to a certain point, and this is where leadership plays its strongest role. Post-traumatic growth. Those of you who've been to a training that I've led before, you may have seen this before, but I love this image. In grad school at the University of Michigan, I was in the personality psychology PhD program from 2009 to 11. I studied post-traumatic growth alongside Dr. Chris Peterson, who was leading a study actually in the Army, and which is one of the reasons why I went to go study at the University of Michigan. And it really starts out with, unless you're a robot, right? When you face adversity or a major negative life event, your well-being takes a hit. Like that's normal, right? As I just talked about. So now the question really becomes is how do we respond in the short term and the long term? And this graph really looks at how do we respond over the long term. There is a percentage of people that never really kind of bounce back. They don't get back to that level of well-being and happiness that they experienced before that traumatic event or before that adversity. What we know is that majority of people, we know this from the research, a majority of people get back to the baseline. They get back to where they were. And it might take some people, a week, it might take some people months or a year. But there's also a portion of the population that not only gets back to the baseline, but they grow. they actually use the adversity as a springboard to grow stronger as a person. And the same thing and the same kind of thinking here applies to organizations. How can you apply this knowledge to help your organization to grow stronger over the long term? Not right now, not while you're in it. That's the thing about post-traumatic growth, is it doesn't happen in the moment, right? If you're looking for all this growth right now in the midst of the chaos, like, you're not going to find like people saying like, oh yeah, I feel so strong, I feel the growth, right? It's really over the long view. And so our jobs as leaders, and this is for students, this is for families, this is for our staff, our peers, our colleagues, right? Part of our biggest role and responsibility we can play right now is to help people to not lose sight of the long play, not lose sight of that the long term and over the long run here, that we can grow from this and we will grow from this. Why is that so hard? Because, as I said in the last slide, it doesn't feel like this. In fact, it feels like the complete opposite while you're in the midst of the storm. So how do we reinvent ourselves? Well, you've already been forced to do it, right? And most people across America have been forced to reinvent themselves in some way, shape, or form. As I said before, this is essentially a transition. We've been through this before. But as we think about moving forward, right, this is not just about now till the end of the school year. And I know that some governors are still making decisions, but it looks like most schools will be, not meeting in person for the rest of the year, right? So this is not about just like for the next 6 weeks or the next couple of months. This is really about like, what does the entire next school year look like? I've read a bunch of articles talking about how, right, there's a lot of uncertainty of like, do we still have to keep physical distancing from people? Like, do things change? Like, there's all kinds of questions that are out of our control right now that are going to be made by other people. But I think it's really important to know that this idea of like reinventing ourselves is going to be an ongoing theme for at least the next 12 to 18 months. So here's a personal story about this. And Jeff Bryan, our executive director, co-founder, and I have been talking about this recently. I graduated again in West Point in 2002, deployed in 2004, 2005. He deployed in 2005, 2006. So like we basically just crossed paths on our deployments. In Iraq, the military was trained for what we call high intensity conflict, or HIC, essentially force on force. Tanks against tanks, Bradleys and armored personnel carriers against, scouts, our field artillery, big shells. Like, that's how the military was trained to fight. And then we got to Iraq and we realized that like the people who were blowing us up and trying to kill us, they were not wearing uniforms. They were not fighting in vehicles. They were essentially using guerrilla tactics, where they would put bombs in the road and they would run wire 100 meters away with an old doorbell and use that to generate the circuit to cause the roadside bomb to explode. I mean, they use all these innovative and creative ways, but the bottom line is the training that we had did not prepare us for what we were facing, right? For the most part, especially in those moments. And I think that's probably how a lot of people feel here, right? In the education world. That being said, I think it's also important to know that we did make the transition. It took us quite a period of time, right, as an army and as an entire military to make strategy changes in Iraq, but we started to make those decisions on the ground at the unit level, and your schools are the unit levels. And so while it's going to take time for policies and bigger picture decisions to make, like, you absolutely can lead this transition at your school to do things right now to help to develop better outcomes. And that's what we started to see in Iraq in 2004 and 2005 when I was there, is we realized like our training, like, while it didn't prepare us for this, we still had our relationships with each other. We still had the ability to work together as a team. Essentially, we still had our character strengths, so that while our specific training didn't kick in, our character was still there. And if we fell back on that, and we fell back on our character and our relationships, that we would be able to figure out how to move forward in a more effective way. Right? So I wanted to share a couple more key ideas with you, around how to navigate the uncertain times that we're in right now and in the weeks and months ahead, and also talk a little bit about motivation. Number one, some key ideas. And by the way, like, some of these have come up with, I've been fortunate over the past 4 weeks now to interview astronauts who commanded the International Space Station, best-selling authors, generals, people in the business sector. They've been very gracious in kind of offering their time and their insight. And I'm going to help try to translate some of those big ideas from them for you. Number one, simplify life in the face of complexity, right? So we've got to spend as much energy as we possibly can lining out and clearly defining our priorities, and then setting up boundaries. This is professionally speaking and in personal lives. Like, we know that if we allow our teachers, or if we in our own lives allow school to and our work to consume us 16 hours a day, and we're not there for our families, we're not there for our other responsibilities in life, that's going to wear us down, and we're not going to do our work as effectively. So we've got to set up boundaries and know that there are certain periods of time, and you just let everybody know, right? Maybe it's if you put up an auto reply on your email. Hey, it's 5 to 8 o'clock. I'm not checking email. I'm not answering calls this time. I will get back to you later tonight at 8:30, when my kids are in bed, right? But we're eating dinner and we're spending time recharging our batteries and playing board games with one another. I think it's really important that we set up these boundaries, and that as leaders, we empower other people to set up those boundaries as well. Number 2, control what you can control. This is a tough one, but one of the simplest exercises you can do here is to take out a piece of paper, write a line down the middle of it, and literally take about 10 or 15 minutes and think about all the things going on in life right now that you can control and all the things that you can't. And then literally take that piece of paper, cut it in half, and then throw it away, burn it, recycle it, whatever it may be. And realize that, like, for all those things that you can't control, right, if you're giving your time and your energy to those things, then at least disproportionately, it's going to wear you down. So even as you think about, like, you can't really control the reactions of your parents and students. You can do some things for sure to get there, to like make progress, but there's sometimes there's things that you can't control, and there are things that you can. So I really would urge you to think hard about all those things that you can control. Number 3, it's a double-edged sword, habits. We know from the research that habits take about 3 weeks to develop. A lot of people that I've heard from are concerned about developing bad habits in this period of time. That's a very valid concern. The flip side to that is this is also a chance to be able to develop good habits and new habits that you want to be better and to be stronger. So I would encourage you to really think hard about and to be wary of, if you find yourself doing a bad habit or practicing a bad habit for a day or a couple days in a row, to really say, okay, stop. I gotta stop this right now, because I don't want this practice to develop into a repeated habit. And then lastly, and this is probably the most important, right? One step at a time. Be patient, have grace with yourself, with the people you lead, with your students, with their families. This is really hard, especially when it feels like sometimes body blow after body blow after body blow, when people are frustrated or angry or upset or disappointed or whatever the negative emotion might be, is just to give people grace and to say, like, I know that these people, this person, this family, etc., is going through some challenging times. And that response that they just sent me in an email or in a phone call is not really reflective of who they are. And to do your very best to be as patient as you can be. This is much easier said than done, I realize, but this is so important to be able to do in the world today. Last couple of thoughts, motivation. As we think about stressful and overwhelming times, one of the things we hear all the time from people is how hard it is to maintain motivation in the face of just the stress and that sense of, and that feeling of anxiety and being overwhelmed. So what are some things that you can do in your life to help out? Number 1, I say this before, but read the right books, listen to the right podcast. I don't have, and you can sit there and go find, suggestions from people and all that. But there are literally millions of books and over 100,000 podcasts, I believe, that exists out there. There is no shortage of resources out there. The question really is not like, oh, this book is the exact one you need to read at this time. It's really like we all need to know ourselves and to know what we need. And to be able to find the right book or listen to the right podcast and get that right message at the exact time is what's absolutely important. And so spending this a little bit of time doing that research and figuring out what is that book that I need to read right now to help me through this challenging time. Number 2, and again, I don't feel this is as big as a challenge for people who are as busy as those in the education world. This is a huge challenge for people in other fields that have been furloughed. But resist the temptation to binge watch Netflix and stream social media. There's a difference between something that's fun and that entertains you versus something that numbs you. And what I see a lot of people doing is allowing the Netflix or the social media to numb them. And to just basically be like, hey, I just need to spend this 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, just like allowing my brain to be like numbed from all the stress that I'm facing right now. So you need to be able to have that entertainment for sure, but don't go down the road of spending too much time and energy doing that. Number three, this is something that we can all do, right? Even those who are on Zooms for 6-8 hours a day, right, is find at least 30 minutes a day, get outside in the sun, walk or run, and clear your mind. This is a little bit more tricky for people up north. Like, I know it snowed in Michigan and New York just a few days ago, but this is important, right? The vitamin D that you get, the sun being out, it affects your mood, it affects your breathing, it affects your mind, and all these various, all these other components of yourself and of your body and of your mind in a positive way. And lastly, I would find myself, before writing the book, Lead Yourself First with Ray Kethledge, in the group of meditation, that's not for me. But I will tell you, setting reminders on your phone to sit there and step back for 2 minutes. Practicing deep breathing, getting that, as we all know, right? CO2, carbon dioxide, builds up in our body. It's literally poisonous to us. We have to push it out. So getting that out, breathing in fresh, tons of oxygen. Like, this is so important to do. And in the stress of life, it's not that we forget to breathe. Like, our body, right? Our hindbrain automatically, basically breathes for us. But I will tell you, it is so important to be intentional and deliberate about this, to just practice that deep breathing and closing your eyes. And this doesn't have to be for 20 minutes at a time. It can be for 2 minutes. It can even be for a minute. But finding these pockets throughout the day when you feel the anxiety and the stress building up, to be able to step back, to get inside your mind, to breathe, and to just focus on being present in the moment, and then getting back to the work and whatever the source of stress that you may be facing. So that is the presentation that I wanted to walk through you with. It's about 20-ish minutes. So 25 minutes. And again, if we were in person, we'd be able to have a conversation back and forth. I hope you can join us for future Zooms, 2 p.m. Eastern, every Tuesday between now and essentially May 21st or something like that, just before Memorial Day weekend. We're planning on having these weekly Zooms and going to talk about various topics that are on your mind, things that have got you, struggling, challenged, things that are working well and that you want to do more of. We're going to talk about all those kinds of things, really through the lens of leading yourself first and then leading other people to your left and to your right. I've said this for a long time. If you're in administration, if you're a principal, assistant principal, you are a leader. I don't even really like that word administrator, because you are leading. If you're a teacher, you are leading your students and you're leading your families and their families, right? All of us to a certain extent are leading our families, whether we have, kids in the household or not, parents that are older or not, whatever it might be, we are all leading one another in some form or fashion. And so the key to leading others well, first up, is being able to lead ourselves well. So thanks so much for what you're doing. As you've heard Jeff and I talk about when we were on The View and beyond, educators are on the front lines of the American dream, and that is no more true than it is right now today. It is a challenging time. It is a frustrating time, but it is also a time that is planting the seeds for incredible growth. And I would urge you to work as hard as you can to be able to maintain that perspective. And at the same time, to continue giving yourself and the people around you grace, knowing that these are not just business as usual kind of days, as you already know. So thanks again for your leadership. I look forward to seeing you on future Zooms, and I wish you all the best as you continue to negotiate these challenging times, and doing so as effectively as possible, knowing, of course, that other people matter, that our character strengths can be drawn upon in these times to help us to get through it, and emphasizing that message to your students and to your families. Thanks again, and see you around.